Dance and sexuality. It's sometimes a little complicated talking about when does the world of dance and the sensual, sexual world, when do those two things come together? Yeah. And I think to begin our discussion, we should probably have to admit that human beings are sexual creatures. Humans rely on sex for pleasure. We use it for stress reduction. Sex is used for the formation of identity, of who we are. We use it to intimately connect with other people. And we use it to express our love. And of course, we use it to procreate, to make sure that there are more human beings in our species. If we look at all the parts of society, you'll find that sexuality sort of weaves itself through the fabric of all of society. And sensuality is woven into many of the parts also. It's just simply a part of the human condition. So in order to really understand sexuality and dance, we have to understand that sexuality is a part of being human. Now, dance is a sensual act, and it uses the body as its primary instrument for communication. So there are times when dance can be provocative of the sexual act and also erotic thought. And we have some dance forms, we have some erotic dance forms that use the body of the dancer and objectify the body of the dancer. They often put it on display in a much more objectified way. And the dancer in this paradigm is typically not the subject of a work of art or the subject of the art, but is rather the object to be evaluated, meant to be fantasized about in a sexualized way. Now, in erotic dancing, there's typically shedding of garments in a stylized, perhaps a titillating kind of manner. And there's the movements of the erotic dancer that relate to and often are metaphorical of a sexualized act. Now, some of these forms we mostly find in places like adult clubs. Now, they can be highly trained dancers who are engaged in these activities. Some of the forms that we can look at, or you can look at, are things like striptease, pole dancing, lap dancing, and there are other forms, and largely, again, adult clubs for consenting adults to be engaged in these activities. There are other sort of sensual and erotic forms and styles that perhaps are more tame, and we might find them in other parts of our society too, although they do also have a kind of sexualized tendencies within them. Things like cage dancing, sometimes that happens at the clubs, go-go dancing as well, clubs, fan dancing, twerking, burlesque dancing, that each of these forms sort of start moving into talking about the human being as a sexualized creature. When art and dance become more sexualized, certain questions sometimes arise for us. Particularly in education, we have to deal with questions of what age is it appropriate for someone to be engaged in dance forms that are sensual. And things like costuming, how revealing should costumes be, at what age is it appropriate to be expressing oneself as a sexualized creature and being. When we get into the topic of sexuality and when art forms and artists push the boundaries, sometimes another question comes up, and it's a question of when does censorship happen, and what is censorship? Yeah. So usually with free expression comes this question of how much should we be allowed to express in a society, and where are the lines where something could perhaps move too far, so people will ask for something to be pulled back. Yeah. Censorship is the suppression of speech or the prohibition of items that are considered to be obscene. Politically, whether they're politically unacceptable, or often people think of them as a kind of threat to the society. And throughout history, you can look at instances where artworks were disallowed, where artworks were confiscated, where artworks were covered. We could even say that that there are words and songs that are considered explicit, and there are times where songs are censored when they're put on places like the radio, that there is certain language that aren't allowed in certain capacities at certain times. Yeah. There's often a question that comes about with censorship is there could be objections to it, disallowing freedom of speech. And the question that sometimes comes up is who in the society should decide, and where the line for the society should be, and how much freedom should be given within that society. And if you look at our society, you'll find, well, if you look at general societies, you'll find that there are different levels of this throughout the world in different countries. Each country seems to develop their own capacities and their own lines, some more restrictive than others. But there's always tends to be the question, particularly in free societies, of when should something be censored and when should something be held back.